The wind carried a mournful whistle across the wooden planks of Harlan McCready's old ranch house, rattling the shutters and stirring the dust in the corners. It was a sound he had grown to know well over the years, a solitary song of emptiness, grief, and endurance. He had lived on this land for over a decade, ever since the fever had taken his wife and the bandits had stolen his only son. He had come to embrace the isolation, the endless desert plains that stretched beyond the horizon, and the quiet that allowed him to forget the world outside. He spoke to no one except the horses and the wind never judged. Until that knocked out, it was faint at first, hesitant, almost polite, yet it carried a weight that made Harlan pause mid-step. His hand instinctively moved toward the rifle leaning against the wall. Nobody came to this ranch, not for years. The townsfolk had long given up on him, labeling him crazy or broken, whispers trailing behind their boots like smoke. But this knock was different. There was purpose in it, a rhythm that spoke of a life that refused to be ignored. Harlan's boots echoed on the wooden floorboards as he approached the door, muscles tensed. His eyes narrowed at the silhouette framed in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun. When he swung the door open, the figure was revealed, a woman, dust-streaked and weary from travel, standing straight-backed, with a determination that immediately set her apart. She removed her wide-brimmed hat with a smooth, careful motion, revealing chestnut hair pulled loosely behind her head and piercing green eyes that met his without a trace of fear. Her coat was worn and dusty, and there was a faint smear of mud along the hem of her skirt. She carried herself with a confidence that was not born of privilege, but of survival. I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice steady despite a tremor of exhaustion. "I'm looking for work, and I heard you might need help." Harlan blinked, assessing her. His life had been one of simplicity and self-imposed exile, and the idea of allowing a stranger into his home and into his life was unthinkable. Yet, something about her presence stirred a muscle long dormant in his chest, a memory of companionship and warmth he thought buried forever. "What's your name?" he asked cautiously, lowering the rifle slightly, though not entirely relaxing. "Evelyn Moore," she said. Her gaze swept past him, taking in the empty rooms, the dusty furniture, the weight of solitude that seemed to cling to every corner. I can work hard, and I can take care of myself. I don't need help, I heard you might be the kind of man who appreciates someone who can manage on her own." Harlan studied her for a long moment. There was a faint scar along her left forearm, partially hidden beneath her sleeve, and the calluses on her hands hinted at a life of labor. She was no ordinary woman seeking shelter. This was someone who had survived storms, hardship, and danger. And yet, there was a quiet vulnerability in the way she stood, a subtle plea beneath the fortitude. "You've got guts," Harlan said at last, his voice rough from disuse. "Or foolishness. Either way, you might last here longer than most." Evelyn offered a faint, almost shy smile. "I can handle myself," she said simply, her eyes unwavering. Over the next few days she proved herself beyond doubt. She handled the horses with precision, her hands firm yet gentle, coaxing the animals into obedience without harsh words. She mended fences that had stood broken for months, hauled water from the distant well, and cooked meals over the fire with a skill that reminded Harlan of times long past times, when warmth and laughter had filled the rooms, rather than silence and dust. But it wasn't just her skills that unsettled him, it was the way she existed in his space. She moved with an ease that drew him out of his own self-imposed exile, and for the first time in years, he found himself noticing her, the way her hair caught the light at sunset, the small crease of concentration between her brows, the strength in her shoulders that suggested she had endured more than most men he knew. One evening, as the sky burned with the hues of twilight and the desert wind cooled to a gentle breeze. Evelyn approached him while he repaired a broken wagon wheel. Her steps were careful on the uneven ground, yet her eyes held a spark of urgency. "Harlan?" she began, hesitating. Her voice held an edge he had not heard before, a mixture of fear and determination. "There's something you need to know about why I'm here." He wiped the sweat from his brow, frowning. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "You came for work. That's all I care about." She shook her head, strands of hair falling loose around her face. "I didn't come for work," she said, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "I came because I think someone's been following me. And I heard you live out here alone, that you know how to handle trouble." Harlan's jaw tightened. Trouble had a way of finding him, that much was true. He had fought off bandits, wild animals, and the harshness of the land itself. Yet, he had no desire to become entangled in another person's danger. And yet, the resolve in her eyes sparked something protective inside him. "You've got enemies, then?" he asked cautiously. She nodded, biting her lip as she spoke. "I don't know who they are, but I need protection, even if just for a little while, and I trust you." Harlan remained silent, the weight of her words settling over him. He had promised himself never to let anyone in again. And yet, the way she stood there, resolute, fearless, yet undeniably human, he couldn't turn her away. "Not this time." "All right," he said finally, a low growl in his throat. "You can stay. But if trouble comes, you follow my lead. No heroics." She nodded, and for the first time in over 10 years, Harlan felt a flicker of hope stir within him. The wind outside no longer carried only sorrow. It carried something new. Danger, perhaps, but also life, warmth, and the faintest hint of connection. That night, as the wind rattled the old window panes and the moon cast pale light across the desert floor, Harlan lay awake. He listened for the faintest sounds of movement, his hand resting on the rifle beside him. Yet, amidst the tension, his mind kept drifting to her the way she had carried herself through the day, the strength in her voice, the unwavering determination that refused to bow even in the face of fear. The ranch, so long filled only with silence, suddenly felt alive. And Harlan, who had spent years building walls around his heart, felt them tremble, threatening to crumble. He didn't admit it, not yet, but he realized that his life, rigid and solitary for so long, had just been disrupted by something unpredictable and utterly irresistible. Evelyn Moore. And as he drifted into a fitful sleep, the wind outside seemed to change its tune. It still whistled, still carried dust across the plains, but beneath it was a promise of something new, something dangerous, and perhaps something beautiful. The next morning, the sun had barely crested the horizon when Harlan and Evelyn saddled the horses for their daily ride to inspect the northern fence line. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and the promise of another harsh day in the desert. Harlan noticed Evelyn's posture upright, alert, her hands steady on the reins, and he was reminded again of how capable she was. This was no ordinary woman, no inexperienced traveler seeking shelter. She had endured hardships, survived, and adapted, and now she was walking into the heart of his secluded world with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen more than she should have. "Where did you learn to handle a horse like that?" Harlan asked, trying to break the silence, though his voice carried over the desert like a low rumble. "My father taught me," she replied, eyes scanning the horizon, alert to every movement. "He taught me everything about surviving out here. Riding, shooting, knowing when to fight and when to run." She hesitated for a moment, a shadow crossing her features. "He didn't live long, but he made sure I knew how to take care of myself." Harlan said nothing. He understood. Some lessons could only be learned through loss and struggle, and Evelyn had clearly learned hers. They rode on in companionable silence, the sound of hooves striking the hard ground punctuated by the occasional call of a distant hawk. But peace was fragile in a world like this, and Harlan knew it. Danger had a way of finding people who tried to hide from it. A sudden movement caught his eye, a thin column of dust rising from the horizon, far too deliberate to be a random swirl of sand. He narrowed his eyes. "Evelyn, we might have company," he murmured, shifting his hand near the revolver at his hip. Her hand instinctively moved to her own weapon, but she paused when Harlan lightly pressed a finger against her wrist. "Not yet. Let's see who it is," he said quietly. The dust grew larger, shaping into 3 men on horseback, moving with purpose and coordination. Bullets glinted in the sun as they rode closer, and Harlan's heart clenched. "Bandits or worse. You stay close," he said, his voice low, guiding their horses into a defensive position. "We're not alone out here." The tallest rider, a grim-faced man with a wide-brimmed hat tilted low over his eyes, called out as they approached. "Harlan McCready?" Harlan's jaw tightened. "Depends on who's asking," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in his chest. The man spat into the dirt. "Word is, you've got something that belongs to us. Hand it over and no one gets hurt." Evelyn's green eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint beneath the surface. "They won't find what they're looking for," she muttered. Her voice held a steeliness that startled Harlan for a moment. She was ready for this fight, prepared to defend herself, and yet there was something more. She trusted him, and he could feel it. Harlan shifted his horse slightly, revolver ready. "Right away now, and no one gets hurt. You come closer, and I won't stop until you regret it." The standoff stretched across the desert, the wind kicking up dust around their boots and hooves. The bandits hesitated, measuring the solitary man and the woman at his side. The tallest laughed, low and cruel. "We'll see about that." Then, suddenly, the first shots rang out. Harlan's revolver barked in the crisp morning air, a bullet striking close to the leader's horse. Evelyn moved instinctively, firing from the side, her aim precise and deliberate. They fell into an unspoken rhythm, each covering the other, each move a testament to survival instinct honed over years of hardship. The bandits' horses reared, kicking up dust, but Harlan remained focused. He saw the leader raise his weapon for another shot and fired, the bullet hitting the man's gun hand and forcing him to flinch. Evelyn pressed forward, steady and unafraid, while Harlan's own resolve hardened. He realized then, amidst the chaos, that this woman was no liability. She was a partner, a force of nature as much as he was, and together they could withstand more than either would have alone. The fight lasted only minutes, though it felt like hours. By the time the dust settled, the bandits were gone, retreating into the distant hills with bruises, minor wounds, and a grudging respect. Harlan exhaled, muscles taut, and glanced at Evelyn. She was a mess of dust and sweat, hair plastered to her face. Yet her green eyes were alive, fierce, and unyielding. "You're good," Harlan said, a hint of awe in his voice. "So are you," she replied, her lips twitching in a fleeting smile despite the dirt and blood streaking her cheek. "I think we make a good team." Harlan didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted over the endless expanse of the desert, then back to her. He had lived 10 years in solitude, guarding a heart hardened by loss. But now, standing beside Evelyn Moore, he felt something unfamiliar, a spark of connection. A fragile thread of hope woven through the tension of survival. That night, by the fire, Evelyn finally spoke of her past. The flames cast flickering shadows across her face, illuminating the small scars, the weariness, and the resilience in her features. "I ran from a man who wanted me dead. Or worse," she said quietly. "He thought I knew something about a gold claim. I barely escaped. That's why I came here." Harlan listened without interruption, feeling a protective instinct rising within him, something he hadn't experienced since losing his family. He saw in her pain the reflection of his own, the echoes of loss that had shaped both their lives. She wasn't just seeking shelter, she was seeking safety, understanding, and perhaps someone to stand beside her when the world tried to crush her. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he said simply, his voice low but firm. "Not while I'm here." Evelyn studied him for a long moment, then gave a small, grateful smile. "I know," she said. The simplicity of the words, the trust behind them, sent an unfamiliar warmth through Harlan's chest. In the following days, they repaired fences, tended to the horses, and shared long conversations as they worked. Harlan found himself telling her stories he hadn't shared with another living soul, of his wife, of the fever that had taken her, of his son, and of the long nights spent alone listening to the wind whistle across the desert. Evelyn listened, never interrupting, her presence a calm anchor in the turbulence of his thoughts. She shared her own story, fragment by fragment, careful to protect the secrets that still put her in danger. Through shared labor and quiet evenings, a bond began to grow. Small gestures, a glance that lingered too long, a hand brushing against another during chores hinted at something neither wanted to speak aloud. And Harlan, who had lived 10 years with no one to share the world with, found himself anticipating her presence, feeling an excitement that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mesas and painted the sky in oranges and deep purples, Harlan and Evelyn stood atop a small rise, surveying the land. "It's beautiful," Evelyn said softly. "Even in the dust, the heat. There's something alive here." Harlan nodded. "It's harsh. It's unforgiving. But it teaches you how to endure, how to survive." He glanced at her, the firelight dancing across her determined face. "And sometimes it teaches you how to trust someone again." She looked at him, eyes reflecting a flicker of emotion he hadn't seen before, hope, perhaps, or the beginnings of something deeper. "I think I'm ready to trust," she said. For the first time in years, Harlan allowed himself to believe that life could be more than survival, that companionship and even love might be possible again. The past was still a shadow, but with Evelyn by his side, it no longer felt as heavy. The desert was wide, the horizon endless, and for the first time, he imagined facing it not alone but together. And so, as night settled over the ranch, Harlan and Evelyn returned to the house. The air cool against their skin, hearts beating in tandem with the wind's whisper. Danger had come, and they had faced it together. Trust had been tested and bonds forged. And amidst the uncertainty of the world outside, they found something rare, something fragile, yet undeniable, hope. The desert wind carried on, but its song was no longer one of desolation. It hummed with promise, adventure, and the subtle, stirring warmth of two hearts learning to beat as one. Harlan McCready, who had lived a decade of solitude, realized something he hadn't allowed himself to imagine in years. He was no longer alone. Evelyn Moore had knocked on his door, and in doing so, she had shattered the silence and begun to fill the empty spaces of his life with possibility, trust, and the faintest hint of love. The days that followed were filled with a tense rhythm, a fragile balance between labor and vigilance. Harlan and Evelyn moved through the ranch as if they were one entity, instinctively reading each other's movements and intentions. Morning light found them repairing fences, checking the livestock, and scouting the distant hills. The wind that once carried only solitude now carried the weight of their shared. WATCHFULNESS. Evelyn was unusually quiet that morning, her green eyes fixed on the horizon as she adjusted the saddle on one of Harlan's horses. Harlan noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly despite her competence. He had come to understand her strength, but he also knew her resilience had limits, and he had no intention of letting her face danger alone. "Something's bothering you," he said, his voice low, as though speaking too loudly might draw attention from the empty plains. She glanced at him briefly, then back to the horizon. "I think he's closer than I thought," she admitted. "The man who's after me. I can feel it. I've survived before, but I'm not sure this time will be so easy." Harlan's jaw tightened. He had faced outlaws, bandits, and worse, but the idea of a threat shadowing Evelyn filled him with a protective fury. "Then we stay alert," he said. "We're not just protecting ourselves. We're protecting each other now." Evelyn nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face. There was a comfort in his presence she hadn't realized she needed, and she could sense the same in him. They had begun to rely on one another, not just for survival, but for the quiet courage that came from shared determination. They rode to the canyon that lay a few miles north of the ranch, a place where Harlan had once gone to think in solitude. The canyon walls were high, jagged, and shadowed, and the narrow paths twisted unpredictably. Harlan dismounted first, scanning the area for signs of movement, while Evelyn tethered the horses nearby. "This canyon," she said softly, "it's the perfect place to hide or ambush someone." Her eyes were wary, scanning the cracks and crevices in the rock, her instincts sharp as ever. Harlan nodded, his gaze following hers. He had learned long ago that the desert offered no safety if one was careless. "Stay close," he said, moving forward with careful steps. "We'll check it thoroughly. If he's here, we'll know soon enough." Hours passed in tense exploration. The canyon echoed with the wind and the occasional call of a hawk, but no sign of human presence appeared until Evelyn's sharp eyes caught something wedged between two boulders. She stepped closer and extracted a small, leather-bound journal. Its edges were frayed, and the cover was stained with dirt and time, but the handwriting inside was unmistakable to her. "It's his," she whispered, holding it as if it might burn her. "The man after me. He's documenting everything. Every move I've made, every place I've stayed. He's obsessive." Harlan took the journal from her hands carefully, feeling the tension radiating from her. "Then we can use this," he said. "We know he's near, and now we have evidence of his path. We can anticipate him." Evelyn nodded, a grin set to her jaw. "I've been running for so long. I didn't want anyone else caught up in this. But I trust you, Harlan. I know you can handle yourself, and now I trust you with me." Harlan's chest tightened. The words, simple as they were, carried a weight heavier than any rifle. He had spent years shutting people out, building walls to protect his heart from loss and grief. But Evelyn had breached those walls without even trying, and he realized he would go to any lengths to protect her. They returned to the ranch with renewed purpose. Over the next few days, they reinforced the fences, checked traps, and scouted the surrounding desert for hidden approaches. Harlan taught Evelyn how to read tracks in the dust, how to predict the movement of someone familiar with the land, and how to move silently, blending into the landscape like shadows. Evelyn absorbed everything with a sharp, unflinching focus, and together they developed a strategy that would make it nearly impossible for anyone to approach the ranch unnoticed, despite the danger. Moments of calm began to punctuate their days. Evelyn would cook meals over the fire, and Harlan would watch her, noting the subtle ways she moved, the tilt of her head as she concentrated, the small smile she gave when the stew turned out just right. He felt a stirring in his chest, a warmth he hadn't known in years. It was frightening, confusing, and exhilarating all at once. He realized he was beginning to care not just for her safety, but for her entirely. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mesa, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. Harlan and Evelyn stood on the porch, looking out over the ranch. The air was cool, carrying the scent of dust and sage, and the wind whispered across the plains. You ever think about what life would have been like if things hadn't happened? Evelyn asked quietly. Her voice held a wistfulness he hadn't heard before, a glimpse of vulnerability she rarely revealed. Harlan shifted, silent for a long moment. Sometimes, he admitted, but thinking about the past doesn't change the present. We survive because we adapt, because we keep moving forward. Evelyn's gaze softened. I like the way you think, she said. I think? I could adapt too, if I had someone by my side. Harlan's heart ached. He had imagined himself alone for the rest of his life, guarding his heart against loss. And yet, here she was, standing before him, offering trust, companionship, even something deeper. Something that felt dangerously like love. That night, the quiet of the desert was shattered by the unmistakable sound of hooves pounding against the dirt road that led to the ranch. Harlan's senses sharpened instantly. He reached for his rifle while Evelyn moved to her revolver, her green eyes bright with readiness. They've found us, she whispered. Her voice steady despite the fear lurking beneath. Harlan's jaw tightened. He had anticipated this, but anticipation offered little comfort when faced with real danger. Stay close, he said, positioning himself near the door, eyes scanning the darkness. We fight together. No hesitation. The first rider appeared from the shadows, gun raised, followed by two others. Harlan fired a warning shot and Evelyn mirrored him, both of them moving with a precision that spoke of shared experience and instinctual trust. The bandits reined in, confused by the unexpected resistance. Harlan and Evelyn worked in tandem, covering each other's flanks, moving with the fluidity born of necessity. Shots rang out across the night, echoing off the canyon walls and stirring the desert into a frenzy of dust and wind. Harlan's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the intense focus required to protect Evelyn and himself. In the chaos, Harlan tackled the lead rider, pinning him to the ground while Evelyn's revolver cut off any chance of reinforcements closing in. The man struggled, sneering, but Harlan's grip was iron. You'll never take her, he growled. Eyes blazing, Evelyn fired another warning shot, forcing the remaining bandits to retreat into the night. The desert returned to silence, save for the wind that now felt almost victorious. Harlan stood, breathing heavily, and looked at Evelyn. She was a mess of dust and sweat, hair wild in the night wind, but her eyes shone with triumph and unyielding determination. You all right? He asked, his voice rough. I am now, she said, a small, exhausted smile forming on her lips. Harlan realized then that the bond between them had solidified in the fire of danger. They were no longer two solitary figures. They were a unit, partners in survival, trust, and something deeper that neither had dared to name. The night stretched on, the stars bright above the desert, silent witnesses to their growing closeness. Harlan finally allowed himself to touch her hand, a tentative gesture, and she did not pull away. In that simple contact, a promise was made silent, fragile, yet unbreakable. The past would always be a shadow, and danger would always lurk in the desert's vastness. But for the first time in over a decade, Harlan allowed himself to imagine a future with Evelyn by his side. A future where the silence of the plains was no longer his only companion, where warmth, trust, and perhaps even love could flourish amidst the dust, the wind, and the endless sky. And as they returned to the house, weary but unbroken, Harlan knew one thing with absolute certainty. Evelyn Moore had become the reason he would fight, the reason he would endure, and the reason he would open his heart again. The desert no longer whispered of isolation. It hummed with the promise of survival, trust, and the beginnings of love. The days after the attack were tense, but a cautious peace settled over the ranch. Harlan and Evelyn moved through their routines with a quiet vigilance, always alert to the slightest sign of danger. The desert had a way of lulling people into a false sense of security, and both of them knew better than to trust its silence. Yet amidst the watchfulness, there was an undeniable calm between them, a rhythm born from shared survival. Harlan had spent years alone, guarding his home and heart, but now he found himself noticing Evelyn in ways he had not anticipated. The way her hair caught the light as she worked with the horses, the focused intensity in her eyes when she repaired the fences, and the quiet laugh she let slip when a stubborn mule refused to budge. All of it made his chest ache with a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to name. Love, perhaps, or the closest approximation he had ever known. Evelyn, too, had begun to trust the desert again, not because the land had changed, but because she had Harlan beside her. His presence was a constant reassurance, a shield against the shadows of her past. She had been running from fear for so long that it had become second nature, but now she found herself slowing down, allowing herself to hope that this place, this man, could be her home. One morning, as the sun rose and painted the mesa in shades of gold, Harlan suggested they ride to the cliffs that overlooked the valley. "I want to show you something," he said, his voice soft but firm. Evelyn followed, curiosity piqued. She had come to respect his instincts and his deep knowledge of the land. But she also sensed there was something personal about this ride, something Harlan rarely shared. The trail was steep and rugged, but Harlan led the way with careful precision, and Evelyn followed close behind, trusting his guidance. When they reached the top, the wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant earth. The valley below stretched endlessly, dotted with the flicker of wildflowers, grazing cattle, and winding streams. "It's beautiful," Evelyn whispered. Awed by the view, Harlan's gaze swept across the landscape, then softened as it landed on her. "It is," he said quietly. "But it's more than that. This land. It survived storms, drought, fire, and death. It's harsh, but it endures. And so can we." Evelyn turned to him, her green eyes shining. "So you're saying we endure too? Together?" Harlan reached for her hand, gripping it firmly. "Together," he confirmed, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I don't want to be alone anymore, Evelyn. Not when I have a chance at something worth living for." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief, hope, and the unspoken promise of what could be. "I don't want to be alone either," she admitted softly as they rode back to the ranch. The wind carrying the scent of desert blooms, a sense of inevitability settled over them. Danger was still out there, somewhere, but together they felt capable of facing it. The land had taught Harlan how to endure, and Evelyn had taught him how to hope again. That evening, just as they reached the ranch, movement caught Harlan's sharp eye. Shadows flickered along the ridge, faint but deliberate. He froze, hand going to his revolver, and motioned for Evelyn to stay low. "They're here," he whispered. "The ones after you. I can feel it." Evelyn's heart raced, but she stayed calm, matching his intensity. "Then we face them," she said firmly. "No running this time." Harlan nodded, a mixture of pride and determination flashing across his face. "No running." As the first rider appeared from the shadows, Harlan and Evelyn positioned themselves strategically near the barn, their rifles loaded and ready. The bandit older now, more cunning. The man who had haunted Evelyn's past road with a mix of confidence and desperation. He thought he had the advantage, but he underestimated the bond between the two who had learned to fight, survive, and trust each other completely. Shots rang out, echoing across the desert floor. Harlan's aim was precise, each bullet finding its mark. while Evelyn moved like a shadow, her revolver an extension of her will. Together, they worked as a single force, anticipating each other's movements, covering every angle, protecting one another as instinctively as breathing. The final confrontation came when the bandit dismounted, advancing toward them with a sneer. Harlan stepped forward, revolver raised, eyes locked on the man who had terrorized Evelyn for years. "It ends tonight," he said, his voice low and deadly. Evelyn moved to his side, placing a steady hand on his arm. "Together," she whispered. Harlan nodded. The bandit lunged, but Harlan was faster. A shot rang out, disarming the man, and Evelyn's revolver followed, keeping him pinned. The remaining members of his gang, seeing their leader defeated, fled into the darkness, disappearing like ghosts across the desert. Breathing heavily, Harlan lowered his weapon and turned to Evelyn. She was a mess of dust, sweat, and determination, but her eyes held that fierce spark he had come to admire. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern softening the edge in his voice. "I am," she said, a tired but genuine smile on her lips. "Thanks to you." Harlan exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders for the first time in days. He realized that the danger had brought them closer, but it was their trust, their bond, that had truly protected them. He looked at Evelyn, her hair tangled in the wind, her green eyes bright despite exhaustion, and felt something undeniable in his chest, a love he could no longer deny. That night, as they sat by the fire, the desert quiet around them, Harlan finally spoke what he had been holding back for too long. "Evelyn, I've spent years alone, guarding myself against loss. I thought that was the only way to survive. But you've shown me something different, something worth risking everything for." Evelyn's hand found his, squeezing it gently. "Harlan, I feel the same. I've been running for so long, afraid of what might happen, who might come after me. But with you, I feel like I could stay, like I could have a home." Harlan's voice dropped to a whisper, filled with emotion he rarely let show. "Then stay. Stay with me. Not just here, but with me for everything that comes." Her smile was radiant in the firelight, a mixture of relief, hope, and love. "I will," she said, softly but firmly, her hand tightening around his. The days turned into weeks, and slowly the ranch returned to a peaceful rhythm. The threat was gone, the desert still harsh but no longer threatening, and Harlan and Evelyn settled into life together. They worked side by side, tending to the land, caring for the animals, and building a home filled with laughter, conversation, and quiet companionship. The wounds of the past did not vanish, but they no longer defined their present. Harlan found himself smiling more, speaking more, and dreaming again not of the past, but of the future he could have with Evelyn. And Evelyn, who had once feared shadows at every turn, now looked forward with hope, knowing she had someone who would fight for her, protect her and love her without hesitation. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant mesas and bathed the desert in warm gold, Harlan led Evelyn to the porch. He reached for her hand, holding it gently, their fingers intertwined. "You know," he said, voice soft, "I never thought anyone would knock on my door again." Evelyn smiled, leaning her head lightly against his shoulder. "And yet, here I am," she said, her voice warm, filled with love and trust. Harlan pressed a kiss to her forehead, the gesture simple but full of promise. "I've spent years living in the shadow of loss, afraid to let anyone in. But you've changed everything. You've changed me." Evelyn looked up at him, green eyes shining. "And you've given me a home, Harlan, a place where I belong, where I don't have to run anymore." For the first time in years, the ranch felt alive in a new way, not just a place of work and survival, but a home filled with warmth, hope, and the presence of someone who mattered more than anything else. The door to their home no longer represented isolation or fear. It stood open, welcoming the future they would face together. And in the quiet desert nights, when the wind whispered across the plains, Harlan and Evelyn sat together, hands entwined, hearts beating in unison, knowing that whatever came next, they would endure it together. The past had shaped them. Danger had tested them, and the desert had challenged them. But love, quiet, steadfast, and resilient, had claimed them both. Harlan McCready, once a man who lived alone, had found not only companionship but a life renewed. And Evelyn Moore, who had run from shadows for so long, had finally found safety, belonging, and a love that would endure all trials. The desert stretched endlessly around them, vast and untamed, but for the first time, the horizon did not seem lonely. It promised days of shared labor, nights by the fire, and a lifetime of quiet, unwavering love. And as they watched the sun sink behind the mesas, Harlan knew that the knock on his door so long ago had changed everything. It had brought danger, yes, but also hope. It had shattered his solitude and rebuilt his world around trust, partnership, and the profound, unshakable bond of love. The door to the ranch stayed open that night, and every night thereafter, not just to travelers, but to life itself, to laughter, and to the promise that Harlan and Evelyn would never be alone again.